Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. What you're about to experience is different. We've collected over 27 real paranormal encounters from people across the country. People who saw things that changed them forever. Skinwalkers, UFOs, cryptids, ghosts, missing time, all real. These aren't Hollywood stories. They're accounts from military, personnel, police officers, and everyday people who are still trying to process what they witnessed. If you've ever felt like something unexplainable happened to you, you need to watch this. And subscribe, because we're just getting started. Let's begin. So a few years ago, when 3 friends and I were having a small fire and just hanging out at night, the night was getting later and we were getting low on firewood, but the family farm has an old plot of trees and maybe 30 acres of old growth with more new growth growing around it. For our area, and this is a lot, we all hop in the truck and drive the couple miles over there. We pulled Mac down one trail that was pretty overgrown and started gathering deadfall from the ground. It was the middle of winter and a cloudless sky, and so we could see fairly well even without our headlamps on. We loaded the bed about half full when one of the guys just got a weird feeling and spoke up. Not uncommon when you were in the cold woods at night. But then we realized that we hadn't heard anything for a bit. Usually you could hear coyotes or the cattle in the feedlot a half mile up the road, but it was dead silent. We all start looking around, and one of my other friends notices something silhouetted by this one evergreen back in the trees. We were mainly just using small headlamps and phone lights, and so we weren't really looking up much. We couldn't quite tell what it was and started thinking it was just a dead tree with its bark stripped. This was about 60 to 70 feet away. Then it shifted behind the evergreen and out of view. Due to where we live and what we do, and we always have firearms near us. Each of us had a pistol, and so very quickly we grabbed them and lit the area up with our lights on them. We, at this moment, were thinking it may still just be a person, not our brightest moment. We called out the basic stuff guys do when they are scared but don't want to admit it, and started making some noise. We were moving to check what was there when it peeked out again. Very quickly, we realized it wasn't a human and verbalized this as well. We started slowly backing up without turning our backs on it, and this son of a witch shifted further out. At this point, our guns were just flashlights in the shock and fear, and very quickly we backed the remaining bit to the truck. No one fired, and we bum-rushed the remaining few feet to the truck. When we shined the light again and it had shifted to another evergreen and not closer and but almost parallel with us and but closer to the trail where we had to go down, we ran the 10 feet to the truck and this thing moved 30 to 40 feet to the other tree, almost like it was going to try and cut us off. We were done playing this game and very quickly spurred the truck down the path and back to the house, and where we decided we didn't want to have a fire anymore and went inside for the night. Just for reference, and the pickup was a small single-cab Toyota pickup that could barely hold 2 in the cab. So the other guys had to sit in the bed and watch for this thing as we tore out of there as fast as we could without hitting a tree. Topography. There is an old cemetery a half mile down the road on the same mile section. Not sure if that matters, but I think it could be relevant. There aren't many caves in this area, and mainly a mix of farmland and thick timber with deep creeks running through the areas. Description: this thing was white. We noticed it by it being almost illuminated by the moon. We didn't get a good look at the body, but it was thin, looked normal height. The face looked hairless and almost blank, but we could still make out the dark areas where its eyes were. Unfortunately, and it was far enough away that even with our flashlight, and it was on the verge of its range, so that's the best I have for it. Beings. I've read a lot about different cryptids and supernatural entities, and I'd had some other encounters or potentials, but this one was the most, and that really happened one. I don't know if it matches the description of a rake and when to go or what, but I still go out there fairly often and just never at night. We didn't really talk about it too much after until recently, and when one of them reached out, and we've been trying to figure out what it could have been or what we should have done in that moment. Does anyone have an idea of what it could be? I just don't feel like it fits any of the common things I see, except in the way it looked but not the way it acted. Skinwalker in the Canadian woods. This happened last night. I live in the NWT. It's the province above Alberta. I live in the only city here, and with a population of about 20K, and beautiful in the summer. We're surrounded by the woods and lots of lakes. There's one popular trail people often drive to access said lakes. Anyway, and last night I was driving on the trail with a guy friend to find a secluded spot to do the nasty. He recommended V Lake, which is the first lake you could access in the trail system. The way it's set up is there's a long, narrow dirt road at the right of the highway that you have to drive on for 20 minutes before you can get to the lake itself. The dirt road is surrounded by trees and is riddled with little lakes here and there. It's my favorite lake to drive to, and mostly because I love narrow dirt roads with lots of tall trees. So it's a Sunday night, and we're the only ones driving. We weren't high or drunk, and we were just having fun and listening to music. Then as I was driving, and about 10 minutes into the dirt road, and an extremely strong smell of rotten meat filled our noses. This weirded my friend out, and it made me panic. The first thing that came to my mind was Skinwalkers. It was vile. And the smell just hit us all of a sudden. The windows were closed, and the AC/heat was set to the lowest. The car is clean, and nothing there could have caused it. I asked him what he thought of the smell. He said barbecue, and I told him there's a current fire ban in effect in the city. That can't be. He agreed and said it smelled really rotten to him. The smell was strong, and it was making me nauseous. I'm now more aware of the woods surrounding us and how it actually makes me feel kind of claustrophobic, and how every turn and curve makes me more anxious. My gut was telling me something isn't right. I kept thinking about skinwalkers and the stories I've read for the past 2 days. I was getting more scared by the moment. Then we drove through another curve, and my lights and high beams shone quickly on a person standing inside the mouth of the woods, and that's when I panicked. I asked my friend, "And do you still want to drive down this road?" "Yeah, and I don't care," he replied. During this time, and I seriously knew something wasn't right, and my brain kept screaming at me to turn around. I keep glancing at my mirrors. Frank Ocean's voice wasn't calming me down. I was so scared. I think he saw my discomfort, and so he piped up again. "We can turn around if you want." I slammed on my brakes and did a 4-point turn and hightailed it out of there. Once we were back on the highway of the trail, and I told him about what I thought of the smell, but not the person I saw in the woods. I didn't want to freak him out. We had a long conversation about it. I know we shouldn't have, but he kept asking questions because he was curious, and so I answered, but tried not to mention its name. Also, and while we were doing the nasty, and we were parked at the picnic grounds of one lake, and little stones started hitting the driver's side of the truck. A couple would hit every minute or so. It unnerved the duck out of me, but I was busy, and so I ignored it. There was no one else on the trail, because we didn't hear or see anyone driving. That was kind of weird, too. One statement of his, and that kind of unnerved me, was, and I think it was trying to lure us further into the woods. So on the way back, and I had him drive so I could calm down. I was calmer on the drive back. There were some foxes with glowing eyes in the middle of the road that kind of freaked me out at first, but then I realized they're just foxes. I also saw a roadkill on the side of the road that had not been there before, and which I found pretty weird. It was the size of a big beaver. But really, and there's nothing to panic about, and I think. So yeah, and this all happened from 1 to 3 a.m. last night. I now really believe in skinwalkers, and I just wasn't expecting to encounter one. An interdimensional car crash? I'm hesitant with this one, but it did perk my ears up. If true, and then it's an amazing encounter. Location: near Amersfoort and the Netherlands. date in 1999, time in 2:15 a.m. The witness was alone on a highway when suddenly the front windshield became dark. He was not able to see, and he hit a car in front of him. He then skidded off the highway and crashed into a tree. He looked at the car, but it was not damaged. A police officer then came by and asked him if there had been an accident. Confused, and he said no. After the officer left, and a man appeared, and he told the witness to follow him. Soon they came upon a landed disc-shaped object with a dome on top and shiny and silvery in color. He took the witness inside and explained to him that he was not from another planet and that he was from planet Earth, but from a different frequency or dimension. He told the witness that the car he hit was one of them and the driver was one of them. They had repaired his vehicle. The man then showed him around the object and explained to him how the object operated. He was eventually allowed to return to his vehicle and went home. My brief encounter: in 1976, and while driving home from a road trip, and I was with my girlfriend, we were in the foothills of Alberta and close to Medicine Hat. I was exhausted, and so I parked my boogie van at about 2 a.m. at the side of the highway. Around 4 a.m., and there was a loud bang on the side of the truck. This startled both of us. I looked out the back window, and running across the road was a tall and long-haired animal with 2 legs. I jumped up. I remember saying, "And we have to leave now," and trying to maintain some calm so as to not scare my GF for the longest time, and I blocked it out and didn't think much about it. I find it funny that your mind won't allow you to believe what you're seeing. I think it looked back at me, but I cannot seem to remember. I never told my GF what I saw. 3-feet-tall monster with sharp teeth sighted. I'm from South Texas and La Joya in Texas. I'm here working in the pipeline and staying in Monahans in Texas. Well, and a few months ago, I went down to my home place a few days later, and I came back. It was a hot, sunny afternoon, and it took me 9 hours to get to Fort Stockton. From there, I took Highway 18 north towards Monahans in Texas. Something didn't feel right. It was a lonely highway. I saw many dead deer and other animals along that highway. About 15 to 20 minutes north, and I saw something eating a dead deer. I stopped to see what it was, and that thing popped its head up while chewing that deer meat. It was about 3 feet high. If you have seen that movie, End Critters, and it looked exactly like that, and except its colors were brown with black spots, it might have been 2 arms or long ears coming down its head. I can still see those sharp, shark-looking teeth full of blood to this day. I'm not making this up. So, travelers going towards the oil fields, and be extra careful. Be aware when you stop to relieve yourself on that highway. The thing by the road. When I was a kid, and my dad used to drive us out to visit my grandparents in rural Kentucky every other weekend, it was a 4-hour drive and mostly highway, but the last part wound through empty back roads and just trees and fields and the occasional mailbox. One night, and it was raining hard, and we were running late. I remember the wipers squeaking and that steady drumming on the roof as we went through a stretch with no street lights at all. Then the car headlights caught something. A person standing on the shoulder. Dad slowed down a little. The figure looked like a woman and barefoot and wearing this thin white dress plastered to her legs from the rain. Her head was tilted down and hair covering her face. I remember the weirdest thing was she wasn't shivering, just still. Dad rolled the window down an inch and called out, "Are you okay, ma'am?" She didn't move. She slowly lifted her arm and pointed down the road. About 100 feet ahead, and a massive tree had fallen across the road. We wouldn't have seen it in time to stop if we'd kept driving. Dad braked hard and heart racing. By the time he turned to thank her, and she was gone. No sound and no movement and no footprints in the mud. We backed up and turned around and found another route. When we got to my grandparents' house and Dad called the county sheriff to report the fallen tree, the deputy said, "And yeah, that's a bad stretch. You aren't the first to see a woman there." This happened in June of 2024, Parker Preserve in Burlington County in New Jersey. My brother and I were driving down a dirt road in Wharton State Forest in June of 2024 looking for a campground in the area. I was in the front passenger seat of his pickup truck. He was driving. This was just a few weeks ago. We weren't going to camp. We were just looking for the site. It was at dusk. The sun was setting almost on the horizon. As we were driving in less than 20 miles per hour and something leapt or floated across the road right in front of us and like right in front of the truck and moving right to left. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like a black square or rectangle and like the size of a black poster board. It went across the road unnaturally and like the way the reindeer move in those old stop-motion Christmas shows. You could clearly see below it, but there were no legs. There was no neck and or head and or tail. We asked each other, and what was that? And then immediately after, and something else scooted across the road on all fours really fast, going left to right and maybe 25 feet in front of whatever the black square was. We both saw the same thing again. This time it was like an all-black chimpanzee or young gorilla scrambling on all fours into the bushes faster than any other animal I've seen run across a road. I clearly saw the hands hitting the road when it was in front of me, and the odd curve of the back struck me. The strangest thing is, and as the second animal first came out of the bushes, and it looked to me like an all-black tumbleweed spinning so fast that the edges looked ghostly, like a black center fading to gray at the edges. This tumbleweed looked like it opened up from a blur to the small ape that we saw. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but my brother saw it the same way. It wasn't a turkey and a baby bear and a coyote and or a dog. It was definitely an ape, all black. If someone told me there was an escaped monkey out in the woods, then I'd say I definitely saw it. We stopped and got out and didn't see anything else. I believe in Bigfoot, but I always thought it was a flesh and blood animal. And if what we saw was a young Bigfoot, and I think there's more to it than that now. I can't explain what the first object was, but the second thing was a whirling dervish that transformed into a 3-feet-high ape tearing across the road on all fours. I saw an 8-feet-tall, dark-hooded figure on the side of the road. When I was a child and I saw a dark-hooded figure on the side of the road that was as tall as the speed limit sign on the side of the road, the hood he was wearing was more of a long, dark cloak. He was running. The headlights of our car lit him up, and he had depth and dimension and not a shadow or some translucent apparition. As we got closer and he looked at me, though I couldn't see the features of a face and I saw his eyes. Has anyone else seen this or something similar? Possible encounter in northern British Columbia. Here is a possible encounter I had a number of years ago in the early 2000s near the remote town of Atlin in northern British Columbia in Canada. At the time, and I was living in the southern part of BC, I had grown up in the Yukon, and so a girl I was dating, and I took a trip up north to visit my parents and who were still living in Whitehorse. Atlin is a couple of hours south of Whitehorse and just below the Yukon border, and it sits on the shore of Atlin Lake. The scenery in the whole area is spectacular. So my girlfriend and I decided to take a day trip there. There were also some warm springs just outside of Atlin and along an old dirt mining road that led farther into the wilderness. The whole area is essentially wilderness, and so it is not as if you can get much deeper into it. After spending some time sitting in these warm springs, and which were really just small springs forming a few little pools, and we decided to explore a bit more and drove farther down the road. We found a spur road that ended in a large pullout where hunters could unload their ATVs. A small ATV trail had been cut through the forest, and I assume it went higher up the mountain whose base we were at. My girlfriend and I decided to hike up this trail just to stretch our legs. as we walked through the forest and we heard the usual sounds of birds and squirrels. Then, and all of a sudden, and the forest went silent. Not long after the silence began, and it was shattered by the loudest and most aggressive scream I had ever heard. The only way I can describe it is animalistic but also disturbingly human, like someone screaming aggressively at the top of their lungs. After we heard this unholy scream, and my girlfriend and I looked at each other and instantly knew we had to get out of there. We turned and walked as fast as we could back down the road to where we had parked. Luckily, and it was not far, we got into our vehicle and sat there for a minute and watching the forest to see if anything had followed us. After a minute or two and seeing nothing, and we started the vehicle and drove away. Both of us were shaking. As I mentioned, and I had grown up in the Yukon, I had spent a lot of time in the wilderness on hunting trips with my dad and had never heard anything like this before. It was not a bear. There are no cougars that far north. We had not seen another person or vehicle all day. It was not humans. I'm not a commercial truck driver, but I've done my fair share of sketchy trips and round-the-clock driving. This particular night had extreme road conditions. The snow covered the road. I was making a new trail on the highway. Passengers are asleep. I got about 1.5 hours away from home when this vehicle was riding behind and proceeded with their high beams and hazards on. So I slowed down to about 60 to 50 kilometers to see if they would pass, but they never did. I was followed for 45 minutes. Finally, the vehicle passed me. It was a blue truck, and I couldn't see inside due to the dark and no license plate. I thought I would be petty and flash them. When I turned the lights on, and this truck vanished in a split second. What did we see? My girlfriend and I were driving from Bremerton in Washington to Shelton in Washington for a New Year's party at my friend's house. Now, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with this highway, but it's a curvy road with only one lane on either side. It was around 11 o'clock at night, and so it was pretty dark out. When we were almost to Shelton and we came around a curve to find something standing directly in the middle of our side of the road, luckily there weren't any other cars in the other lane because I would have either hit them or whatever was standing in the road because I had to swerve all the way into the other lane to avoid it. After we barely missed this thing, and neither I nor my girlfriend could figure out what the duck was standing in the road, this thing looked gnarly and almost like it was snarling. It kind of resembled a bear, but it was also way too tall to be a bear. I guess you could say it had the legs of a deer and the upper body was a bear. I don't know if there are skinwalkers in this area, but whatever it was, and it did not look familiar or friendly, I've seen plenty of deer and bears to know that it wasn't either of those. My girlfriend and I both just refer to it as the demon bear that almost didn't let us make it into 2020. Can anybody help me figure out what the hell we saw? My 2 encounters in Northern California. I was 6 in 2001. My uncle and grandma and I stayed in the Hoopa Valley. We are Apache living in Southern California, and we had family in Northern California who had a cabin. We went to stay with them, and during that night we heard loud screaming in the woods. We called the nearest ranger post, and they said they would keep an eye out. Now, and it could have been coyotes or wolves, but as I have grown older and become fascinated by gorillas, and I remember the scream sounding very much like a gorilla scream, and though I was young and may have just been scared, my uncle and cousins confirmed they heard screaming as well. But they say that's normal in the Pacific Northwest. I'm skeptical of this being a Bigfoot, but still, it's in hardcore Bigfoot country. My second encounter was when I was 20 and driving to Ashland in Oregon and to see my older sister with her family. We were driving through Shasta Trinity National Forest and far in front of us, a giant hairy thing ran across the street into the brush. It had orange hair like an orangutan and ran in an ape-like motion and not fully on all fours but almost really hairy and like a thick coat going near the trees as well. We could tell it was giant and fat as well. My reaction was, I lightly said, WTH is that? My dad tried today, and we'll say it was probably a sickly grizzly, but even he at the time it happened said, what the F? So he was shocked by it as well. It was orange and long-haired and hairy. This one, I believe, was a Bigfoot, but of course I understand skepticism. Just funny, and they were both in the same area. The Pacific Northwest is hardcore Bigfoot country. So, yeah, and your thoughts? Interesting Mothman sighting, Middletown in Ohio, and it was about 8 p.m., and I was driving home after dropping a friend off at her house. I came to an intersection and a red light and stopped. Nothing out of the normal and just a regular night. The roads were fairly deserted. While waiting for the light to change, and I saw something that looked like the back end of a deer as it quickly crossed the street. I didn't think much of it, except for the fact that when I drive through there, and I have to be careful because deer apparently like to jump in front of cars, that stretch of road is only a couple 100 feet posted at 40 miles per hour. I slowed to about 30 to 35 miles per hour to watch and look at the deer. When I looked to see if the deer was still there, and I witnessed something quite a bit different. This massive thing was standing back a ways, but it was clearly visible. The yard it was standing in has a huge white shed with a light attached to the front, and though this didn't help because it cast a big shadow, the figure stood on the ground, but its height reached to about the top of the doors to the shed. It had two curved-like masses coming from the sides. But the most obvious feature was the deep red and glowing eyes coming from the center of the black mass. It was something I couldn't stop looking at. I continued to drive, but all the way home I felt I was being followed. Has anyone come across anything spooky on Sugarloaf Mountain in the Roosevelt National Forest? My boyfriend and I had a strange encounter with something on Sugarloaf Mountain and just outside of Boulder in Colorado. We had decided to save money by camping in our cars at campgrounds while we were traveling. At around 7 p.m. we arrived and parked at the entrance of Sugarloaf Campgrounds. We set up the car with blankets and blacked out the windows with trash bags and settled down for the night. At around 9 p.m. and we heard something. It sounded like several heavy raindrops scattering along the top of the car, except there was no downpour that followed. I felt as if the car shook very slightly. It just went silent. We hadn't covered the windows perfectly, and there were little gaps. Near my window, I saw a black shape move. I thought it was my boyfriend's hand, but I reached up and found nothing. Later, when I asked him about it, and he said he saw something move past the window and thought it was my hand. It felt like forever that we sat there and listening. We were on a gravel drive, but I couldn't hear any footsteps. There were no other sounds. I looked up and saw a black shape move past the front passenger's window. Then the tapping sound started again near the side mirror by the front driver's door. My boyfriend hit the lock button on the keys twice to make the car honk and blink lights. The windshield was the least covered part. The trash bag wasn't long enough to cover it, and so there were some sizable gaps on the sides. Once the car made noise and a dark shape moved slightly into view, it looked like the snout of an animal. I wildly thought it must be a bear. They're the most active around early November. However, and there was no huffing and no grunting and no other sounds besides that weird tapping and some rustling that shook the car very slightly. My boyfriend slapped his hand against the window and trying to scare whatever it was off. It seemed like the more we tried to scare it and the more bold it became, the snout kept appearing by the window. My boyfriend whispered that maybe it was the trash bag blowing in the wind, except it moved in such an animal-like way, plus there was no wind that night. Finally, we decided to make a break for it. My boyfriend jumped in the front seat and started the car. truthfully, and we would rather not see what it was. I told my BF to drive as far as he could with the trash bags still covering the windows. We pulled the one covering the windshield. We didn't hear anything running away, we didn't hit anything, and we didn't look back. We made our way down and eventually took the rest of the bags down. Once we felt we were far enough away the whole ride down, and we tried to rationalize what it was, maybe an elk bear or moose, but that didn't explain those perfect tapping sounds along the roof of the car. We also would have heard an animal huffing or walking around the car. Maybe a smaller animal had hopped along the roof. But what was that huge black shape moving around the car? Maybe it was the trash bags? This does not explain the tapping sound or the reason why the car moved. I'm not a hardcore believer in the paranormal or supernatural. I've always liked cryptid stories because they're spooky and fun. If you had asked me before this if I really believed in things like Wendigos and Bigfoot, and I would have said, and maybe even if I don't really believe it and I still respect it, when we first got there, and I did have a weird feeling and thought about joking about a Wendigo being nearby, but I didn't want to invite it or call out to it, and even if it's not real, I tried keeping things light. After this, and I don't think I could not believe in it. I firmly believe it was something unnatural. Every rational explanation didn't make sense. Let me know if anyone has had any sightings or weird encounters near Sugarloaf and Roosevelt National Forest and/or Rocky Mountain National Park. Old Road 81. First off, and I love listening to stories here, even though I am skeptical most of the time, honestly, and growing up in Pennsylvania, and there are a lot of abandoned buildings and haunted areas. I would go ghost hunting a lot. I would try to do seances as a kid, and etc. And nothing ever happened to me. Even when I experience strange occurrences now and I simply dismiss them, the last explanation I consider is that they are caused by a ghost or apparition. I only had one encounter ever, and 6 years ago, and when I used to live in PA. There were these dirt roads me and my friends would drive around at night around our rural area. Honestly, and there wasn't much to do in that area. Anyway, and there was this really cool overpass bridge called Old 81. And because it was a small bridge that ran over the 81 highway, it was pretty up there just to park your car and watch the cars pass underneath at night, and the stars were really pretty. I was driving around with my friend at the time, and let's call him Bob. So Bob and I just got done hanging out on Old 81 and having pretty deep conversations about life and time travel and aliens and conspiracy theories and, and all the stuff that can sometimes keep you up at night. We get in the car and start to drive. The fastest you can go on this particular road is 15 miles per hour in this spot. So we are going fairly slow. Suddenly, and I experienced a sensation that is difficult to articulate. It felt like a wave of uncomfortableness, as if you see a huge spider next to you and you want to shake it off. But also the physical energy around me felt like a vacuum of negative energy. I can't really describe it. It felt sucking and not negative as in pain or fear, just very physical. The moment I feel that sensation, I look up and see an outline on the side of the road illuminated by the headlights. I can only describe it as glass held up to the sun and where you can see the outline and depth. It was very organic looking and it was like a bubble. But the way it moved looked like a person walking. Brakes, he stopped and looked at me and said, "And do you see that?" I looked at him and just made a face. We then sped off. After we calmed down and we talked about it all night and the week after and lol. Before he dropped me off and I said I felt weird before we saw it, he said he felt the same way, but he also experienced a sudden feeling of dread that came out of nowhere. If anything, and it was just a weird experience and just so strange, never had another experience like it. Has anyone else ever experienced vacuum feelings or anything similar to what I went through? Something creepy in the roadway. This is my story about an experience that I still cannot explain. If any of you can help me rationalize what I had seen this night, and that would be great. The year was 2021. I had just moved to a rural area in southern Alabama. A town called Brundage is located just outside of Troy. We moved into a small house in the middle of nowhere. And on this night, and my brother and I were going to Troy to go to Walmart, my brother was driving and I was sitting in the passenger seat. At this time, I was 31 and my brother was 35. He passed away last year, and we have never been able to figure out what we had witnessed. So here's what happened after taking the right-hand turn off the main highway onto the dark rural back road, and which, mind you, is also a dirt road that leads to our house. We were probably going about 50 miles per hour. There are houses on our left and a forest area on our right. Very few street lights. High beams were on, music was on, but not too loud. Ahead of us was a turn that created a T intersection and allowing for a right turn, but we were going straight in the middle of the road, and something was standing there. The closer we got, and the scarier it appeared. If you have seen the movie In the Village, and then you'll have an idea of what we were seeing, it's standing in the middle of the road and at the T and facing the homes on the left, with the road that turns right directly behind it. It's not moving and is standing about 8 tall and give or take. The closer we get, and I keep telling my brother, and what the duck is that? Dude, and what the F? That's when I notice it's literally floating about 2 to 3 off the ground, and its head is slowly rocking back and forth. It looks like a person's body with shaman robes and a pig-shaped head that's enormous. My brother doesn't slow down. I ask him what he's doing, and he says he's not letting it attack us / get inside the car. I tell him, and it could be a person, and maybe. He doesn't respond. We're not slowing down. We reach the point where we're about to hit it, and all of a sudden it turns towards us, and poof. It doesn't vanish, but sort of, and it blankets the entire car like a tarp. It sounds like a giant tarp folding over the entire car. My brother cranks the wheel left into the front yard of someone's house and slams on the brakes. We come to a stop, and whatever it was is gone. Completely gone. Nothing there. We slowly pull back onto the road and drive the last 5 minutes home. And when we got there and I tried explaining it to the rest of the family, my brother was so shook up he had tears every time he tried talking about it. It was an absolutely frightening experience that I'll never forget. I've done a little research and found that the area had a significant Native American presence, and which suggests it could possibly have been related to some sort of shaman. I have no idea, but I actually wanted to share with y'all. If you have heard of anything similar or can help me understand what we had seen that night, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Weird late-night car ride. Couple of years ago, and my mom and aunt and sister and I went for a late night drive around 12 a.m. We do this all the time, so there are a couple roads we always go down, one of them being where the KKK used to meet up the original church, and a couple other buildings are still back there. It's a straight drive down the road and taking around 20 minutes from start to finish. About 7 minutes down the road, and the radio station we were listening to cut out, so I started to look for a new one. Listening to stations for a couple seconds and then going to the next while doing this, and a song came on. That was a bit weird. I skipped past it and then went back. We listened for a minute or so and decided it was weird and changed it. I don't really know how to describe this song because I've never heard anything like it, but it was older sounding and only instruments. Anyway, and after I changed it and my mom and who was driving and noticed she had no idea where we were, my aunt pulled up our location on her phone. We ended up on a road that was a dead end. We were pointing in the direction of the main road, and meaning we would have had to turn down the road and do a U-turn, which we didn't do, and we had only gone straight down the road like we always did. But it gets even weirder than that. 2 hours had passed. The last memory we all had was the song, but it felt like everything had happened in the span of 2 to 3 minutes. To this day, and none of us know what happened or how we got there. And we also haven't been down that road again. The Skinwalker. The following is an account told to me by a Native American brother-in-arms Marine buddy. We swapped stories as we rotated in and out of our duty station during the Gulf War. This is, and as best I recollect, and because he witnessed this as a younger child and would hear tribal history and folklore retold by elders in his native tongue, I do not doubt this man. The recount begins with stories of the supernatural. My friend, and we'll call him Curly, and asked if I had ever heard of a particular stretch of highway in a remote southwestern desert. I shrugged, and he continued in saying people would report to the local authorities that they were being paced by a werewolf or dog-looking creature, and for lack of any other descriptor, it would run next to their car and you could not outrun it. Disturbing details such as attempting to open the car door and calling out your name or family member names and being unable to harm the creature. In fact, and you could research accident history in that area and would be able to run across many stories of people attempting to outrun the animal and only to lose control and wreck. There are also EMT stories of people babbling about the previous as they were dying or riding to the hospital as a child, and he would attend the large family gatherings and as has occurred for eons, and they performed ceremonies and recounted stories of their champions on one occasion, and the conversation turned to the Skinwalkers. This was back in a time when children played together, away from the adults. You didn't interrupt the adults, and if you did and it was only one of you, and that interruption had to be worthwhile, so when the children had been playing outside when the ceremony began. Curly and a few others had snuck into the house and were taking turns watching through a small hole in the wall. Many gathered around one, and shamanic chanting and animal skin and smoke and dance and ancestors, and he looks away because he is scared. When he looks again, and there is a skinwalker surrounded by the same elders. They all bolt. Native lore is as follows. Tribes who were in alliance and had a need for communications and such as impending war or herd movement, and needed to get that message quickly from village to village. The spirits of the ancestors were called upon to bless the one walking with skin and the supernatural powers of that animal. The skinwalker could then shapeshift into a wolf and run at incredible speeds with great stamina to each of the villages and deliver the message. He complained in polite disgust that the wrong people in the tribe now had the knowledge of the ancestors, that they enjoyed using the supernatural powers of mind reading and shape-shifting and other unnatural abilities to their advantage and even for profit. Fresh pedestrian sighting. One night, my daughter and her boyfriend and I were driving home. She is 15, and I have been teaching her to drive, and so she was driving, and I was in the passenger seat, and her boyfriend was in the back seat. It was late, around 1,130, and we were driving down this road. This road is located in the city, and so there are still some people driving, but not many. It has an incline that leads to an overpass for the freeway, and which includes both exits and entrances. Anyway, and we are driving, and we are about 150 feet from the base of where the road begins to incline, and we see this thing running across the street. The best way I can describe it is it was big like a wolf, but very thin. And you could see the front paws coming up off the ground and then tucking under the front half of the body before touching the ground and allowing the back legs to come off the ground, just like a dog runs. And but something about it was off. And I immediately got an eerie vibe. But I didn't say anything to my daughter. But we both kind of looked at one another with this puzzled look on our faces. So we keep driving, and the dog makes it across the street. There was no foot traffic at this time along the sidewalks, and so it should have just been the dog, which was now coming towards us. We get stopped at a red light, and I am waiting for the dog to come past because you could tell it was heading our direction as it crossed the street, but as it emerges out of the slight darkness, and there is no dog, it is a man with a pale face and 2 black vertical slits for eyes and a really creepy ear-to-ear grin on his face. And he is riding a bicycle, and he passes us. He turns his head slowly to look at us, and and the energy coming off this thing is so ominous and so creepy. I looked at my daughter, and she looked at me, and we both knew what the other was thinking. And so I asked her, "And you saw that, right?" And she said, "And yeah." And I said, "And you saw what ran across the street too, and right?" And she was like, "And yeah, and it was a dog." And I was like, "And okay, and that's what I saw too." And then she asked, but if it was a dog, and where did it go, and where did the man come from? And I said, "And I don't know. This animal that ran across the street was big. It wouldn't have been able to not be noticed. It was huge and about as tall as a Great Dane and maybe a little taller. But it had the body style of a German Shepherd or a Husky. And I noticed that all 4 of its legs lifted off the ground as it ran across the street. There was nowhere that the animal could have gone to, because on that side of the street, and there is a concrete barrier, as I said, and it was an overpass to the freeway, and at the bottom of the hill, and there is a little grass area and a sound wall. So there is nowhere that this animal could have gone. And that was the only other thing we saw on that side of the street. I don't know what we saw. But it was an animal at first, and then it was human, and the energy was chilling. I've never seen anything like this since, but it still baffles me all the time I think about it, and especially when I am driving in that area. Has anyone else ever encountered anything like this before? If you're in Salt Lake City and it's in the 400 South and Redwood Road area, my unexplainable experience. I want to preface this by saying it was about 15 years ago. We didn't see anything or hear anything and only have questions of what. A friend and I were out late one night cruising back roads in their Jeep. This was a normal occurrence. I grew up camping and survival training and mountain biking in remote places and etc. The woods at night were nothing new. We had been cruising various roads here and there and town to town and into the wee hours. We turned off the main highway along a Forest Service road that headed north. Nothing out of the ordinary. Windows down, as it was a nice summer night. I was driving, and around 10 minutes in, and an overwhelming sense of dread overcame me without making any change in pace, and I asked my friend, "And do you feel that?" They turned to me and pale-faced and absolutely agreed. I proceeded to make the most concise 3-point turn of my life to ensure we did not get stuck and immediately return the way we came in. Only once getting to the highway did we start to feel better. It took us some time to fully calm down, and we talked about what we felt. We agreed we felt the same thing. There were no sounds and no smells and nothing on the road. We didn't see anything. We only felt the exact same thing at the exact same time and knew we had to leave. A Bigfoot in the area is the only thing that makes sense to me. Our primal brain may have reacted to its presence in a way we do not yet understand. Our intuition could feel it, a survival instinct from years ago. Our brain could smell it, but we couldn't. I have been within 10 feet of bears on the trail while mountain biking and had a Mexican standoff. I have seen grizzlies and moose and elk and coyotes and muskrats and raccoons and deer and beavers and etc. and all up close and either on foot and on a motorcycle, from a vehicle or whatever. I've awoken at my campsite surrounded by coyotes at night and had a curious small animal investigate me in my sleeping bag as I slept under the stars. Nothing has triggered my primal fear like that. I wish I saw something or heard something and anything tangible. In any case, and this is a captivating tale, it's late on Saturday night. Get spooked. I moved back to the area this year. I'll go back to the exact location this spring once the snow melts. But as we all know, and there's a slim chance that anything will happen again, that's life. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but my mom saw it too. For context, and my family and I usually go to the countryside on weekends since we have a farm. We live in the city, and the car ride from the city to the farm is an hour or an hour and 30 minutes tops. I have 2 younger brothers, and my parents are together. So in total, in my household is my dad and my mom and me and my brother and my youngest brother. Both my parents each have their own car. and this time we went in 2 cars. My dad and brothers went in my dad's truck, and I and my mom went in my mom's car. Why? Because the next day, my mom had a hospital checkup, so we had to return to the city and then drive back. Anyways, and once we finished the hospital appointment and we started our way back to the countryside, and it was getting dark, 07:30-ish. Skip forward a few minutes. We were on the highway with almost no cars around, and except for one that was about 1 kilometer away, while my mom and I were chatting, and our surroundings included a field on the driver's side and a forest on the passenger's side. I was sitting in the passenger's seat, and I looked outside and saw what looked like a horse, and a really tall horse with long legs and yellow shining eyes. The horse's torso looked short and disproportionate compared to the legs, and the lack of light made it look like a shadow. It was about 60 meters away, and I ignored it, and once we got closer, and it ran towards the car but disappeared before it could pass the fence separating the forest and the road. I was weirded out, but didn't mention it until my mom said, "And did you see that horse?" I was shocked and said I did, and we both continued in silence. I think we were both trying to figure out what that was, but after that I had a feeling we were followed and looked at. At night I heard a horse walking outside my window, but ignored it, since we have a few horses of our own on the farm. I did find it weird because my window looks to the garden, which is fenced off, and the horses we have roam outside the garden area, and that's a few meters from my window. So if anyone knows what that could have been, and please tell. Kentucky in 1983 and pig-human hybrid sighted. A Kentuckian woman reports she was on her way home driving on Highway 94 when she spotted the creature in plain daylight. I was in my little red Mercury Bobcat, and I saw a tall and slender creature on the side of the road. She told Thomas Markham about the 1983 encounter. She claims the unidentified animal had just jumped out of a field crop just 50 feet away from her vehicle and running across the road like a gorilla. It was using his arms and legs and headed into the marsh-type land going towards Kentucky Lake. She says she got out of the car and shouted at the animal. The animal then stopped and turned around and began looking straight at her. Reportedly, and as fear sank in, and she headed back to her vehicle and locked its doors. I waited a few minutes while the creature was still visible. This was rush hour. But the odd thing is that there were no vehicles in sight, she recalls. So, she says, and hoping someone would come along, she waited a little longer. I could flag them down and they could see the creature too. She described the creature as a 7-foot-tall hairless animal with pink skin and a long torso and arms and hands similar to that of a human and short legs. Its neck was longer than a human's, and it held a small head with small pointy ears. She said its face hosted intelligent eyes and a pig-like snout. She believes the being was young and that it reminded her of a teenager, mischievous but not harmful. I would describe it as a cross between a primate and a pig and a human, she said, and as soon as she got home and she told her husband about the odd encounter, but he didn't take her seriously, he thought I was crazy, but I know what I saw. Said, and Markham thinks the animal could have been a dog and man, and a cryptid reputed to live in the northwestern quadrant of Michigan's Lower Peninsula, although other sightings have been reported in different locations, such as Kentucky. The beast was first reported to have been seen in 1887 by 2 lumberjacks, and who described it as having a human body and a dog's head, maybe with some kind of skin or hair condition that caused it to lose all of its hair, and theorized Markham. Why would anyone get out of their car and holler at an unidentified animal? Strange that there was no traffic. Watch out for the smoke. Location: near Deming in New Mexico and 1992 and midnight. The witness was driving on US 180 along the desert and was listening to his CB radio when the radio suddenly went silent. and he vaguely noticed a patch of white light shining on a rise over the left side of the road. He then heard a voice in his head telling him to watch out for the smoke. Thinking it had been the CB radio, and he replied, but there was no answer. Suddenly, what looked like a huge, luminous cloud of smoke began stretching across the highway ahead. It formed a solid curtain across the road. The witness drove into the grayish-white vapor for an hour. He stopped his vehicle and walked across the road and into a ditch, but was still unable to see anything. He suddenly went into a state of paralysis and sensed the approach of two persons. Each person got on either side of the witness and placed a firm grip on his forearms. The beings had long, bony fingers. He was then led to a shiny, metallic object shaped like a flattened arch with rounded ends. A rectangular opening appeared on the side of the craft. Next, he remembers sitting back on a chair inside the object and feeling dizzy and numb. He was briefly alone, and then two beings entered the room. One being was a male who had a round oval face and two large oval black eyes. He was 5 feet tall with a thin torso and limbs. The second being was a female, and similar to the male being, the witness was then led to a dimly lit room and placed in a reclining position on a chair. He felt a buzzing and stimulating sensation on his facial area and felt as if a small object was being introduced into his nose. He was then released and led outside, and he floated horizontally towards his vehicle. He resumed the drive, and the vapor-like fog quickly dissipated. Avoiding the toll roads in Oklahoma near midnight, my great-aunt had just died, and I was able to get enough time off to go to her funeral. My husband and I, and from Colorado, and decided to travel through Kansas and Oklahoma to northeast Texas. The drive started off rough, and with our battery giving out once we got on the interstate and away from the city. Even though the battery was out and the car alarm was going off, we got a new battery, but the burglar alarm wouldn't stop even while we were driving. We took the fuse out in Kansas. We avoided tolls as we made our way through Kansas and only stopping for lunch. We can't avoid any major issues until Tulsa and our interior lights and the car won't turn off. We took out another fuse. We get on the toll roads to make it to Texas. It's 9:3 p.m. and dark. We didn't know the tolls in Oklahoma were only cash. We can do the first, and grabbing a 20 at the brightly lit gas station before the next, and getting change to break the bill up. We make it through a few until we are out of cash. And the next point to get more is a 20-mile detour. She gives us a write-up and puts us in the system. If we don't pay the toll at the next booth and state troopers will arrest us, we go off the detour. And the gas station closed over an hour ago. There is nowhere for us to get more. Our car stalls, but we figure out if we hit the gas right away after starting and we can drive. We take the back roads and the unpaved roads that run along the side of the toll roads. Our car roughly makes its way. We need to find the right turn onto Jumbo Road. The sign comes into view and painted on poster board. The paint never set, or the humidity made it drip like a child's school project. We tentatively turned. We saw animal eyes reflecting at us as we made our way to the first curve. At the bend, and a dog ran out into the unpaved street at 11 p.m. I slowed, and it came beside the car and bit at the tire, and we sped up to lose it. A few acres later, and another dog came to bark and chase us, and newly as tall as the windows. The movie The Hills Have Eyes haunted every property we passed. Our car was worse for wear as we made it back to the interstate and finally crossed the border to Texas, and only an hour away from the hotel room my mom had booked for us. At 1 inch the morning, and the fog had rolled in and making the winding small-town highway nearly impossible to drive on. We could only see, and we had near collisions 6 times before we finally made it to the hotel at 1:3 a.m. A weird creature lurking by my home at night. So when I was a junior in high school and my boyfriend at the time came over to hang out with me at my mom's house, it got pretty late, and so he decided he should hit the road and get back to his house, and considering we had school the next day, it was fall time, not super hot and not super cold. So anyway, and he left around 10 to 30. It's well past it being dark outside. Around 5 minutes after he left my house, and which would have given him time to start his car back out of the driveway and pass the first stop sign onto the main road, he called me in a kind of confused voice. He said, and I saw something. Obviously, I was already kind of freaked out because I'm a nervous Nelly. And I asked, and what do you mean? And I stood up slowly and began to walk to my front door to make sure it's locked and passing my back door on the way and checking that as well. He told me as he was driving down the street. He saw a dog-like creature, but it was massive and like larger than a Great Dane and long bony legs and kind of shaped like a hyena. He said it almost had no hair, but what was there was mangy and patchy, and the creature was tan and brown in color, and he described it as having a huge mouth with prominent teeth and teeth that stuck out on both sides. He sketched up a picture of it on his phone, and I wish I still had the picture, but unfortunately I do not. But it terrified me and sent a chill up my spine. Apparently it was heading in the direction of my house, and so he called to make me aware. I just didn't even bother to look outside or anything. It very well could have been a sick dog or something like that. But my ex never exaggerated. And that picture was horrifying. It was like a hyena werewolf-like thing that had mad rabies. Any ideas? It was the summer before my sophomore year in high school, and 1985, and my twin sister and I went for a bike ride. We lived in a small town, Pop 3000, and this was before any technology like we have today. I'm so glad we didn't have social media back then, but I do wish we had the internet for school. We had to go to libraries. We had our Walkmans on and rode to A&W, and they aren't around anymore because I wanted to see a guy I liked that worked there. The road is a major highway for little towns in the Midwestern state. I lived in that runs east and west, and so we rode east. It's about a 2-mile ride from our house. There are houses on both sides of the 4-lane highway. So we would ride on the sidewalks or cut back a block and ride off the main highway if it was busy. Nothing is busy in a town of 3,000. We get to A&W to turn around, and in case you don't know what an A&W is, and it's a burger and fries joint, and as we are waiting for the cars to go by to cross the highway, and a truck goes by. There was technically only one person in it, a guy with dark hair who was oblivious to what was in the truck with him. As we watched the truck approach and we see what we thought were 2 people, the passenger sitting next to the driver looked oddly white. Everything about it was white, but not a beautiful white. It was dingy white. As the truck approached and moving at the 25 miles per hour speed limit through the residential area, and I increasingly focused on the white passenger and feeling a growing sense of unease and wondering, and what is that? As it neared us and I realized what it was, and as the truck passed and it was looking at us and smiling, I made eye contact with it, and about 15 seconds after the truck passed and we looked at each other quizzically at the same time, and we both said, and did you see that thing? Yes. What was it? It wasn't human, and nor did the driver know it was with him. It looked like a skeleton, but had some density to it. And it was wearing a dingy white t-shirt in the same color as it was. It had scraggly arms with very little flesh and horrific wavy white hair that was thin and eyes that looked dead, but it could see. It had turned its head to look at us and smiled, the most horrific smile I've ever seen in my life. It had its arm around the guy's neck, and like you do when you're watching a movie with someone you like/love. It had jagged teeth, and some were pointy and long. When it grinded us, and we weren't afraid, but got the distinct sense that it was attached to this guy, we confirmed we both saw the same thing and biked it back home. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. We still talk about it today. Since we believe we are spirit beings and that more is happening in the spiritual realm than the physical one, and we 100% without a doubt know it was unearthly. Sometimes I think it didn't happen, but I can't seem to forget it either. I am driving down a highway fast, about 14 years ago, and I was angry and frustrated at my entire life. I was just in a bad way, and not really caring about anything. I was not at all suicidal, but just in a dark mood for many good and bad reasons. It was just a bad season in my life. As I was speeding and maybe just 15 over, and I got pulled over like any other traffic stop, and the cop pulls me over and waits a bit and then gets out of his car. It got kind of strange after that. I've been pulled over a lot in my life. I speed a lot. Usually it's quick and obnoxious and shitty. I sign my ticket and that's that. He asked me for my driver's license and I gave it to him. He said, and you can't go that fast here. Maybe on I-70 but not here. Just slow it down. Hold on for a minute. I'll be right back. I thought that was an odd thing for a cop to say. He was kind of cool about it though. Real chill and laid-back kind of vibe. I remember that because he looked very much like a cop, but was way too easygoing and chill to feel like a cop. He walked back to his car and the lights flashing still behind my parked car. I waited and waited and waited. I looked behind me and no cop. I called 911 and kind of irritated that I didn't get my driver's license back. He just drove off with my insurance and driver's license. What the fuck? I told the 911 operator what happened. He put me on hold. As he did so, and I looked down, and my license and insurance were on the dashboard in front of me. The 911 operator said, and sir, we have no one operating in your area. The closest officer we have is 20 miles away from you. The crazy part was when I saw my license on my dashboard and I immediately got really happy and almost comforted. It was kind of like my dad was pulling a prank on me. I wasn't giddy or beside myself. I was just really happy and calm. I don't know what it really meant and still don't. I have theories. I have some ideas. It was the most surreal thing that ever happened to me, and mostly because I never felt such a weight lifted for me. It was almost like the message was, and calm the hell down, and stop taking shit so seriously. I was sober. I was pretty straight-edged and didn't drink or use drugs for years before or after the event. I was not tired. It was in the afternoon. I don't have these experiences ever or lose track of time. I've had no head injuries or diagnoses of mental illness. I rarely ever tell anyone of this face-to-face. I didn't tell anyone for weeks after it happened. It was just too difficult to explain. Maybe it was an impersonator, but how did he do the driver's license thing? Why did I suddenly feel calm and at peace? Why didn't I see him leave? I used to be kind of embarrassed to tell this to people, but not anymore. I'm 43 years old. I have a master's degree. I barely passed. I'm not a genius. I have 2 kids. I've just been alive long enough to now know that I don't know shit about almost anything and that there's a lot of mystery out there. I'm just hoping someone else had a similar experience. Black-eyed and soulless creature. It was the first month of 2014 on a highway near Mount Hood, and 2 of my best friends and I were coming back from a snowboarding trip at about 1,130 p.m. The night was eerie and away in partial fog and not a soul around. We were driving about 55 miles per hour. I was in the front passenger seat as I began to make out a figure ahead of us in the second lane to the right of us. It just stood there. We drove out of the fog, and there it was. A clear image of a creature that is not of this planet. As we drove by it, I stared right into its soulless black eyes. The driver only got a glimpse of it and thought it was a small deer, and so he did not bother thinking twice about it. The other passenger was asleep. It felt like I had looked into the eyes of death. The creature was about 4.5 feet tall with large black eyes. It had wings covering its body and skinny legs sticking out at the bottom. As soon as I got home and I made a sketch of it, when I showed it to the driver and I saw that deep inside he knew what this creature was and that he saw it as well, He just didn't want to accept the fact of something so unearthly. He was a Christian buddy of mine to this day, and the image of that lost and empty and soulless creature is still imprinted in my head. They are real, and they are out there. I was followed home by some sort of entity. First off, and I'm from Portland in Oregon, tonight was a relatively clear night. It rained earlier in the day. There was no fog or any other weird weather. I know how this sounds, but this really happened and freaked the duck out of me. I'm naturally a pretty tough guy, but this made me call my wife while shaking like a leaf and ready to cry because it was freaking me out so bad. Less than 10 minutes ago, and I was on my way home from my friends, about 10 minutes into my drive, and I noticed I was being followed. Literally all the way home, and more than 10 miles from the time I noticed this dark cloud thing. I was on the freeway going about 60 miles per hour when I noticed it. It never missed a beat, literally kept exact pace with me for 10 plus miles. Literally the only way I can describe the thing is as a small thunder cloud and pitch black but somewhat able to see through. It was about 5 feet high and I'd guess about 25 to 30 feet long. I was the only car on the road, and out of the corner of my eye in the right-hand lane next to me was this thing. A cloud is the best way I can describe it. It was very dark and formless, kind of translucent. I could barely see through it, but it was transparent enough for me to not be 100% sure it was there. It really freaked me out, and so I called my wife, and then I decided to change lanes into it to see if it would disappear, and it did. I thought so anyway. About 30 seconds after I lost sight of it, and it instantaneously reappeared right outside my driver window. It was a little bit taller than my car and was about 3 times as long. When I took the exit to get home, and it disappeared again. And I thought I lost it. Less than a minute later, and it reappeared outside my passenger side. It was almost as if it would just float over my car from one side to the other while keeping pace with me the entire time until I turned into my driveway and where it disappeared again. My driveway is about a half-mile long and shared with 5 other houses. The house right before mine has a dog that always runs up and jumps on the chain-link fence and barks like clockwork. But as I drove by, it ran toward the fence and stopped dead in its tracks about 15 feet from the fence and didn't make a sound. This has never happened before. Seriously, and this dog never misses a chance to yell at the neighbors. My wife was waiting in the front yard for me when I pulled up, but because of the darkness of the driveway and lack of lights, and she said she couldn't see anything. Has anyone ever heard of anything like this? I'm honestly freaking the hell out right now.